Hi everyone. The year of Yammer is one that many would describe as plentiful, prolific, vast. It's been a big year for Yammer, and as we started to record everything for this episode, there was so much to share that we decided to divide it into two parts. On this first part, we talk with Murali, Sitaram and Feuvrier-Danziger from the Yammer engineering team to dig into strategy of the intranet overall and their key integration work across apps. And then plan to jump into part 2 to learn more about Yammer use and adoption and the benefits for Microsoft customers, including highlights of all the new key features. With that, on to the Year of Yammer, part 1. Welcome to the Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Intelligent Intranet. I'm Mark Cashman, and I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Chris, across the wires from me, McNulty.
Thanks, Mark. Today, we'll talk with our Yammer crew in two parts. First, we'll have a discussion with our peers in engineering, Murali and Luke, all about their strategy for the service, recent innovations and integrations, and more. On our second guest segment, we'll catch up with our very own Mike Holsty and Angus Florence to talk about big news and customer use and adoption stories, and of course, best practices.
Oh yeah, this is like they like to call things Yam Jams. This is the Yamcast. We're going to be Yamcasting, yamming it up.
I'm really glad we're doing this episode. Yammer's definitely been hitting a resurgence over the past year. We know the numbers that we can see that, the growth is skyrocketing, and I think there's a real focus at how we use digital tools to drive, better engagement, connection, community. And it's really great to see it paying off with new product experience.
I've gotten a lot of feedback seeing what the Yammer team is putting out there, and you and I, get pulled into a variety of conversations around what to use when and how do you leverage X or Y, at Microsoft, or what are you hearing from your customers? In the last 2 years, I would say with Yammer, there's been real clarity on what it is that people do with Yammer and how effective it is in supporting that, what we used to call the outer loop, but really that way to stay engaged in a real broad fashion, especially with people that you might not know, but are engaged with around specific topics or what is now more focused on. You'll hear both marketing and engineering refer to as communities, that support of broader communities across the organization. And I kind of wanted to ask you just initially, if you thought back 4 or 5 years ago, what you used Yammer for, and today, as you leverage Yammer internally for whatever purpose, has that significantly changed for you, or has it just become more clear in either how you talk about it or how you think about it?
I'll be honest, it has changed substantially because the internal communities that I'm connected to have become much more responsive. Back in the days of enterprise social networking, before I was talking about being at Microsoft, talking about this, there's a real network effect, right? Like, two people don't have a lot to do in a community fabric, but the more people you connect to it, the more valuable the connection becomes. And so one thing I've observed in some of the communities that I'm engaged with is there's much more rapid response. I put something out there and I can immediately see it's getting seen and liked and commented on, within hours, if not minutes. What have you been noticing with Yammer internally?
Yeah, I'll think back to a role I had a while ago where I was really focused a little bit more than I am today around customer stories and working with customers, to tell their stories, find out, the different areas of SharePoint that we covered. And so I oftentimes, besides answering questions or asking questions, would put out to our field, which is a lot of people, and certainly I don't know them all, but really, for the field that you and I work with pretty closely, it's about 15 to 20,000 people on a given product, a given scenario or a campaign. So I used to put out an ask, hey, we want to hear a customer story on this part of SharePoint. Maybe it was upgrade from SharePoint server X to Y, or it was the broader adoption of what people are doing in online. And I would put out an ask, here is something that we'd love to tell a story around. Does anybody have a good recommendation? Usually it was somebody that I didn't know was able to, respond and say, hey, I've got a great customer, we should talk with them and have that dialogue, and then of course move it to a meeting. Today, because we are certainly on a different cadence of announcements and wanting to announce things with clarity, and that starts for us internally when we make some news, big or small. We want to make sure that it lands with not just our customers, but even before that, with our field and our partners. And so that sharing mechanism, but then because we might not be 100% buttoned up with having, positioned something right or talked about it alongside, something that's a closely related offering that people might get initially confused with. It's to, I don't want to say work out the kinks, but it's a two-way dialogue, like you said, very quickly. You put out some information, and if there's a lot of questions, it's a really great signal. Okay, I need to make that more clear. I need to include additional details. But it is pretty quick because I think a lot of people are, supportive, both when we have something that we're asking a question about or sharing, and vice versa. If I see our leadership team post things, or I see what other groups are putting out there and I have a question, I'm easily encouraged to engage. And because, like you said, it's a quick engagement, it's a little bit, I think, just easier to use Yammer than it was, a number of years ago, user interface and feature-wise. So I agree with you, and those are a couple of reasons over the years of how I've used it, and I think where it's come from with lots of improvement.
So we could yammer on about Yammer all day, but why don't we pause this and turn our attention to our first set of guests today.
So now that we've got all that yammering out of the way, let's transition now to hear from Murali Sitaram, GM of Yammer, and his partner in crime, Luc Feuvrier-Danziger, Program Manager on the Yammer team. Murali, first tell us who you are and how you got to be lead of Yammer.
First of all, Mark, thank you for having me. Excited to be here talking to all of our listeners. I've been at Microsoft now nearly 3 years. It'll be 3 years in September. And it's been a very exciting journey. How I got here was via a range of companies, Google, Cisco before that, about 30 years of experience. I've always been very excited about the role that social networks and this sort of public conversation, discoverable, scaled capabilities effectively applied to enterprises. And so, in my journey through the last 24 years or so, I've had a couple of those experiences. And this was the preeminent one of them because Yammer has been this amazing acquisition that Microsoft made a few years ago. And then my job was to come and make it really part of M365. We'll talk more about that later.
Yeah, I'd love to understand that journey. I was on the SharePoint team when Jared Spataro and my manager at the time, Michal Gideoni, actually helped with the acquisition. And I just remember really early stages, it was very much a standalone offering. And really to look to where it is today, that it's a deeply integrated part of Microsoft 365. I love the journey. I really love a lot of the scenarios, and I can't wait to hear a little bit more. Luke, do you want to just share with us who you are, what you've been doing with Yammer, and maybe a little bit of context before that, your journey to get there?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Luke. I work on the product team here at Yammer. Before Yammer, I worked in the world of kind of ads and ad tech. And I think coming to Yammer, I was really excited, both because it's a mission I really believe in, but also because Microsoft is really well positioned with the data it has. And my job here is to infuse our product with intelligence so we can kind of find all of the good nuggets from across your organization and curate it and present it up to you. We can get into that a little bit more later, but that's what I'm currently focused on here at Yammer.
Great. I know you both are dialing in and we're chatting through Teams. You're in San Francisco. I'm in Sammamish, just pretty much a hop, skip, and a jump from the Microsoft Redmond campus. But thank you for joining us. I know you have probably one of the coolest Microsoft buildings. Can you also just give us a little hint of what the Yammer office is like and the energy? Just because I think it really is a unique place to work.
Yeah, I think the Yammer office, which was acquired by Microsoft, and now the Microsoft office, actually spans a city block. It's between 9th and 10th Streets on Market Street in San Francisco. It's an old historic building. It was used for, other purposes. I think, artisans and folks making carpets way back when or other things. So the ceiling walls are really high. We have a great sort of San Francisco vibe there, and we have a great team. And Luke and I, go into the office under normal circumstances every day. We really have a close-knit team. There are other teams as well in the building, but Yammer is probably the largest tenant of the Microsoft teams that happen to be there. So we're super excited. We also have teams in Redmond and the South Bay, and also a team in India in Bengaluru. So we're a global team.
That's great. And I think you work on a global product that probably helps you all not only work better together, but keep focused on what the needs are from the different use cases. So Murali, do you mind taking us through kind of that brief history from then to now, where it started and where it is today?
Yammer started off as, I remember this time because I was at Cisco then, and we were trying to build a similar sort of product. Yammer started off in the 2008-9 period. And it was probably the preeminent enterprise social network platform out there. And it differentiated itself from effectively having a freemium, perspective to it, so people could use the product and then buy into it if they scaled within their organizations. You could bring in people from the outside. You could have multiple instances of Yammer that you could use within different parts of the organization. Things that now we take for granted. Slack does this. Many of other products like Zoom do it. You can bring in people with just consumer email addresses and quickly start collaborating. It always had this concept of an open forum where you could create these public spaces where people could just congregate, sort of the proverbial water cooler, if you will. And then one thing led to the other. It became the tool where people would effectively become sort of the gold standard for groupware or teamwork. This was before the days of chat. And then Microsoft acquired Yammer in 2012. The journey started then, and I feel it has meandered along in different ways. I want to fast forward now to the last 3 years, where our journey has been very strongly to go about ensuring that we integrate Yammer into Microsoft 365. We'll be talking more about that as we go forward here as well, but that has been the core of the journey. And I think from my perspective, the main part is to ensure that my Yammer superpowers shows up through a variety of different tools. And it's not just a destination, and it's meant to be a destination on its own.
I can't wait to hear really some of the challenges that you faced and, of course, overcame when you worked across the different teams. You certainly, I'm assuming, have a charter from up on high in terms of the particular role that Yammer is to play, clarity of that, and clarity of how you engineer that. And Luke, I wanted to ask you, with that charter, within the last few years, I think you've been with Yammer since 2016. I remember from the past, a lot of the value that Yammer brought beyond the product was the engineering excellence to be able to really treat the product as a service and to be able to iterate and do things that aren't shipped every 3 years, but really are worked on every week, month, and every quarter. But can you give us a perspective of building Yammer, how you do it now with that engineering excellence in mind that I think stems from the team in San Francisco?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two parts to that. So one is the kind of general process, and the second is kind of like the tooling and how we think about those. And in terms of the process, I think one of the biggest changes has really stemmed from overall strategic clarity, which we'll get to a little bit later. But the idea that we used to be very focused on being this general purpose product communication tool to really starting to focus on the three core pillars of leadership engagement, knowledge, and communities. And I think with that change came a few different kind of process changes in terms of how we kind of thought about the problem space. But one is, really getting specific about, who our users were and what we were doing there. I think the second is, as we started off with, very bottoms up adoption mindset, we had, a lot of the same tools that a lot of consumer companies use, which is we bias towards data and quantitative insights to power a lot of our learnings. And, as we've kind of, refocused on the top-down adoption and intentional rollouts across companies, we've started to do a better job of, I'd say, blending the qualitative and the quantitative to make sure that we're kind of focused on the right things. And then in terms of kind of the engineering systems, I think the big change that's happened is how we worked as an engineering team has also evolved to what we used to do was we had kind of this concept called initiatives. And initiatives were really focused around giving us as an organization maximum flexibility to tackle the biggest, most pressing opportunity at a given time. And so teams would kind of break apart and reform on a, quarterly basis to make sure that we were kind of always tackling the top most important thing. With the focus on these three pillars, it's really given us, I think, the long-term consistency where we can then now reorient the teams towards longer-term ownership of these areas. I think how we worked before definitely had distinct benefits of making sure that we are applying all of our people to the most pressing things. It also did have some trade-offs and downsides. I think that where we're going is really about building this deeper, longer-term expertise in specific areas. And it also makes collaboration across the suite much smoother, just because we do have, the consistency with where we're focusing on and what we're building. And so kind of as we continue to evolve, I think we can expect to see kind of much deeper investment in these focused areas that will really kind of help drive kind of continued engineering excellence.
I think the way that you all monitor the real metrics, how people use it and learn from that and are willing to adapt both to ways that we want to make product innovation land and, of course, be respectful to what we're hearing or what we're seeing in terms of how people use it. I know Murali and Luke, but I'll start with Murali. The big initiative, which I think we have kind of given a label to, is the new Yammer, establishing this new way that it blends into Microsoft 365. And of course, it brings a whole host of innovation that will, I certainly want to talk with you about the strategy and the planning that went into that, imagining that there were a lot of those metrics and initiatives that had gotten started that led you to do this. Can you take us through that strategy and planning that is now effectively what we're talking about now, the new Yammer?
Yeah, the new Yammer, by the way, this is the year of Yammer, hashtag year of Yammer. We christened it that because we felt that there was just so many things we were evolving from people who might remember Yammer in the past. Number one, and Luke was referring to some of this, we honed in our strategy to go deeper in three areas. One is to ensure that leaders and employees can connect in multi-way dialogue within their organizations. The second was to create and share knowledge. And the third was effectively to ensure that these large-scale conversations can be had within companies with maybe potentially hundreds of thousands of employees. The reason to do that was it created deeper engagement and it created a better employee experience. In the past, Yammer was more about collaboration and teamwork, and Teams now is our hub for collaboration. And it does many of these things that maybe Yammer wanted to do in the past. But technology has now moved to a point where chat is a better medium for those things. So we wanted to really focus attention of Yammer on these three areas. The second thing we wanted to do was to modernize the experience for mobile and for web. And the reason we wanted to do that was that it'd been a while since we had invested in the front face or the facade of Yammer, how it looked, how it, the modern sort of, world we live in with modern technologies and the ease of use of apps, both on web and mobile, was something that we hadn't architected into Yammer because it was 8-9 years old. So that's sort of the second thing that we started off. And that's where the genesis of this new Yammer came about. The third part that we wanted to change was that this was, yes, a destination. We were building a new Yammer, and it was focused on these three areas we talked about. But we also wanted to make sure that we didn't keep all of those superpowers to ourselves, and that the only way you could get those superpowers was to somehow come to this destination. We wanted to be an integral part of the Microsoft 365 suite. So in the last year, we've built integrations with Outlook, with Teams, with deeply embedded with SharePoint. All our files are stored in SharePoint today. We've got new web parts that, in fact, are in preview today and rolling out soon. All our customers know about this, and I know they're excited to wait for it, which gives you the whole new Yammer experience in the context of a Yammer SharePoint site of any type. We're going to continue to extend that as well and make that a rich experience so that you can build these very strongly engaging employee experiences in SharePoint. So those three become deep integrations. By the way, we did other integrations. We are storing our data in the exchange substrate. So that what that allows us to do is to avail of all of the great IP features that power M365, whether you have E3 or E5. So things like data governance, e-discovery, legal hold. Eventually, we want to make sure that content from Yammer accrues to Microsoft Search. We're working with the Cortex team to ensure that we can integrate Yammer question and answers into the knowledge generation, capture, and dissemination experience through AI. By the way, Luke is going to be working on certain things where we want to listen to signals from the rest of the suite so we can get better at fine-tuning the conversations we surface to you so you can discover things that are germane to the job that you're driving on a day-to-day basis. So Yammer has fundamentally changed in the last couple of years. And this year, we want to bring all of that to life for our end customers. And hence, we christened this the Year of Yammer, and we call this the New Yammer.
I'd love to drill a little bit further into that last component because I think it's the part that our end users will see so much, and whether they're distinctly thinking, I'm using Yammer, or they're distinctly thinking, I'm getting a question answered and I can see the best answer from a couple of days ago. Whatever the scenario might be, that integration work that you're doing really means the end user doesn't have to switch context. They can really stay focused where they are, but they get the benefits of additional superpowers that Yammer has always had and is now honing in on. So, Luke, with the role that Yammer plays within Microsoft 365 deeply integrated, can you take us through a little bit of how you approach that, working with the other teams and, of course, with the end user in mind across a number of scenarios? I know there's integration with Teams, integration with Stream, integration with SharePoint.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything starts with kind of the end user and how we can benefit them. There's a few kind of core examples. So, one in general to what Murali already kind of talked about, a lot of this is, how do we kind of make these integrations seamless? So it's not that, the user needs to navigate to Yammer to be able to get the benefits, but we kind of meet them in the context that they're currently in. So, for example, one of our core pushes is around, supporting first-line workers. And with that, we've developed a deep integration with the Teams app, and making sure that first-line workers can kind of easily and seamlessly navigate between Yammer and Teams all within one app to be able to get important corporate announcements and kind of just engage with broader communities. And, I think with, the crisis and everything that's going on right now, that's been incredibly important for a lot of organizations. I think with SharePoint, a lot of it is around kind of helping make a lot of these sites more alive, more engaging, and being able to embed actual conversations into them so that, when there is an employee resource group or, a leadership SharePoint site, that we can kind of merge all of those different modalities together to create the holistic experience and kind of push that forward. And so that, I think with all of these things, a lot of it is, where are users? What are the specific contexts that they need? And then how can we help empower these different services with the things that Yammer is uniquely good at to help them kind of achieve more.
I have to say, just from what I've seen, I certainly know it holistically from SharePoint end to end. And from an end user perspective, I now leverage it in Teams and I get the integration with Outlook. And I think the job that you really are hitting really, really well is what is the activity or action they're trying to accomplish. You don't want to just iframe Yammer into Outlook or Teams. You want to give them a place to have a two-way dialogue that's really minimalistic in what they're trying to accomplish. And I really like the way that you've embedded a really rich experience, but very mindful of what the end user is trying to do. Compliments there certainly on the integration work, both on the effectiveness of it, but the approach that you took to be mindful of the end user.
Especially, I think, Mark, with the Outlook integration that we built and the SharePoint integrations, because the intent of that is precisely what we might not have done in the past. The intent is for you to not have to go to Yammer, but to effectively experience its superpowers. In the past, any integration we built, and by the way, that exists in many other tools, not at Microsoft as much, but in the industry where the goal is to get you to their destination or to a destination. In our case, the goal is for you to complete your task or to discover things or to respond in the moment. When you're sitting in Outlook and you see a Yammer conversation in its full rich glory, there is no need to go to Yammer now for that conversation. You might go for other things, but you do that at your time. But you happen to be in email and you're trying to do a certain job there, and you're trying to triage your email so that you can respond to people and continue your projects or your work. And the last thing you want to go do is go somewhere else. So I think that whole notion of saying, we'll come to you, go to where the users are, help them with their day-to-day tasks, or by discovering knowledge or building their brand or creating and amplifying these rich employee experiences or connecting with their leaders. We feel we're finally at a point where we are thinking about this in a way that I'm not sure that we've thought about before.
You phrase that around the task, the action that the end user wants to do. If you don't mind me asking, I know one of the tasks that you use Yammer in integration with Stream and other technologies that we position around what we call live events. And I know we can get into what is a live event, but I'd love to start with how do you use that in what I know you call Yammer time. And I want to lead you in with a little bit of music. It's Yammer time. No. Okay. But can you describe, you call it Yammer time. What is that? And then maybe we can get into the tech that supports it.
Yeah, on a monthly basis, we bring our entire team together. We talk about the issues that are important to us, introduce new folks onto our team, talk a little bit about strategy and direction, check into our metrics and see where we are. I mean, most of the people on our team don't check metrics like I do crazily every day, but they'd like to hear on a monthly basis how we're tracking against our goals. We talk about promotions, who are the key people that have been promoted on our team, and and their contributions. So we celebrate those. We celebrate releases. We bring in sometimes customers from the outside to give their perspective on their use of Yammer or Office 365 groups. By the way, we're going to rename Office 365 groups Microsoft 365 groups. And I think it's a great testament to the fact that the groups platform powers all of these experiences, Teams, Yammer, SharePoint, etc. In these monthly meetings, we use Yammer live events. Especially now that we are all remote, can you imagine there's no one in any physical location? So there's all live events are all remote. And by the way, it's not just us, it's our customers, it's across Microsoft. My boss uses it for his communications and time management group stand-ups that he does every week, by the way. We do that for our experiences and devices team, where we get thousands of people attending this live event. And of course, well chronicled is the fact that our CEO, Satya, also runs a monthly town hall where all of that is driven in this combination of technology between Teams, Stream, and then attendees attend in Yammer, ask questions. So the whole point there is an interactive experience, even though we are all remote, not with people talking at the same time physically, but conversing at the same time, asking questions, making comments, praising somebody, appreciating all the people that we promoted. And the thing about this is that you can have a before and after. It's not really only during the live event. You can have a set of questions asked before the event, and then you can continue the dialogue after the event. And I think that's something that's very rich from a perspective of both internal use and what our customers are doing with live events. Again, talking about the integration team, Mark, this was done by a complicated set of integrations around real-time video and streaming technology with Teams and with Stream, and the conversational and broad distribution capabilities of Yammer. And of course, integrated with calendar so that people can know a live event's going to happen. It's scheduled for them. They're invited to it. They can click and join. So all of our technologies come together in unique ways. And we wanted to make sure that we were bringing all of these things together. There are different ways to do live events. We won't go into all of those details, but depending on your use case, if you think that any of your live events have questions or a conversation that happens before and after, and you want to queue up questions for your leader so that they can answer during the session, then Yammer is a great way to run your live events.
Yeah, I think that going from an ad hoc live event to something that's heavily managed, you mentioned yours, your manager, but up to Satya, there are some that are just a web camera, somebody talking and addressing and answering questions, possibly across a couple of people, to something that might be multi-camera, somebody managing the Q&A, prompting the presenter. There's a lot of different ways to stage both first-party, third-party encoders. I think the live events integration is again that testament of there's a lot of great base capabilities, but it really focuses on what is the use case and what is somebody actually trying to do. They're not going to use Yammer to talk with the rest of the group. They have a message that needs to be carried through, and it's got a video component, a Q&A component, and of course metrics all the way through to see how many people attended, what questions were asked. And I love the concept of asking a question before and follow up after, because you only have so much time to answer things in real time, but you can always get back to it later. And that being a living article and what you mentioned before and how that will feed into things like Project Cortex and the broader context of search, hugely important. And it's really, at those times where you get that real solid knowledge from the people who have real questions out of the heads that have real answers, which is wonderful. When you think about live events, when you think about Q&A, communities getting stood up, people leveraging, obviously now Microsoft 365 groups as the backbone, which brings to it that automatic notion of where files get stored. What are you seeing people do? I know we track metrics anonymously. What would you say you are seeing people do that starts to tip the hat into, what you're thinking about doing next? You don't have to share beyond the year of Yammer, but, I'm curious, as you see people leveraging some of the new technologies, what is that getting your thoughts around and what you're seeing people do?
One of the key things that we see our customers do is to start using these broad platforms like the enterprise social platforms. By the way, I'm not a big fan of that term. Enterprise social is just a mechanism or method that we're using. It's really a very broad, open public space where people can connect, collaborate, and share. That's one of the people are using that for things like support communities, as an example. So one of the better communities, even at Microsoft, is the one where, when I say better, meaning more heavily used ones, are the ones that effectively the Teams team uses to broadcast its new features and get feedback from the 100,000+ Microsoft employees and contractors and so on. So it's a wide forum where membership is not restricted. So these support communities and best practice communities are things that we're seeing customers do a lot with some of these features, and Q&A becomes a critical part of that. We have a lot of vision about where we'd like to take that next, but integration with Cortex is a key one, where now special topics then accrue knowledge, even just by people conversing in platforms like Yammer. And the topic page that Cortex creates becomes richer and richer over time. In fact, you can create new topic pages by just doing, creating a new topic within Yammer. And that then accrues content from the rest of the suite. So we are building value without even people having to explicitly do anything with it. So that's sort of one type of use case, like these large communities. The other is where people are effectively connecting with their leadership. So we call it leadership connection. Our executive team answers a lot of questions. We now have a community manager for that, calls those questions, makes sure they get answers, pushes them to the right people. But that's a forum where people can effectively feel they're connected to Microsoft and its leadership. A lot of our customers are asking for the same thing. The third, I'd say our customers are doing, and uniquely Yammer is well suited for this, is the frontline worker use case. Like if you're a frontline worker, I know a lot of them are not working now, staying at home. So hopefully this changes very quickly. But if you're in a franchisee, like we have some customers that, or if you're in an airline industry, or if you're in some sort of fast food or retail establishment, you want to be told by the mother company, what are the new products, what, talk track I could use, what are the procedures if something happens, what ideas that I can submit to that then, might help with customer satisfaction or cost. All of these things are frontline worker use cases that are uniquely suited to Yammer. Email and even chat are not perfectly suited for that sort of use case, because then you have to, somebody else, it's a one-to-one or one-to-few connection. Here it's a many-to-many connection. And so those are some of the examples, Mark, about use cases of where people are using Yammer today.
Yeah, I feel Yammer has always provided everybody to have a voice. I remember when I first was on Twitter and I was just at mentioning somebody who was a little bit more in the celebrity realm, and I wouldn't say I made a connection, but I was able to put out a thought to them that they may or may not see, but every once in a while you get engagement that you don't expect, or you have that way to reach out. And I think Yammer has a similar quality of giving people a voice. And off of that, Luke, I want to ask you, besides metrics, how are people, especially our customers, providing that voice to you? I know we have user voice, but what are some of the listening mechanisms that we can share with our customers if they have ideas, if they have feedback or questions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we have kind of a number of different areas where we kind of look to solicit feedback. There's user voice, there's kind of direct kind of conversations. The best and kind of most fascinating that I found while I've been here at Yammer is we actually use Yammer to collect feedback. So we have a community within Yammer that we include all of our customers in. They can basically start conversations with us, the people who build Yammer, around specific things. And that could be, things that they want, any questions that they have. And it's a great forum just because it's not just them providing feedback in isolation, but then all of the other customers who kind of use and engage with Yammer can also see that, and they can build on top of that or amplify it and do a number of other things. And so I think, that for me is kind of one of the best sources of kind of connection with customers.
That's a great external network use case. And I imagine that their engagement not only gives you a lot of great insights, but it also lets them experience the product in ways that it was meant for, which I think is great. I want to say thank you for joining us here on the IntraZone. I want you to stay safe in San Francisco and keep on churning out the great innovation. I use it all the time. But really, thank you for your time and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. I think there's much more to come in this year of Yammer. For example, we brought Yammer to Teams, and we are hoping that many of our customers can avail of all of those. But it's great to talk to our customers through the context of the IntraZone podcast. So hope your users like it, or your listeners like it enough that you'll invite us back again.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us on the broadcast. I'll particularly note we're really excited about everything that Yammer is going to bring to Cortex for the year to come, and we're really excited about all the potential there.
I can't wait for that. And I love the working relationship between the teams and what we think we can add in terms of value to our customers. So thank you very much, Chris.
All right, so I think we got a good base from both our engineering and marketing peers to know all things there are to know about the year of Yammer. But don't go away. We are moving in to hear what are the most frequently asked questions, probably a lot about Yammer, across all of our guests, and then Chris and I will round it up with our FAQs.
So now we've reached the part of the IntraZone where we want to introduce frequently asked questions. These are questions that our guests have heard from listeners just like you, from our customers, that we want to share here with the audience. So Murali, let's start with you. What's a question that you've been hearing out there from our customers that you'd love to answer for the audience?
Chris, the most frequently asked question for me is when should I use Yammer, and when should I use Teams, or when should I use Outlook? From my perspective, what we want to try to do over time is take that question away from you. We want to bring the superpower of Yammer to Teams, to Outlook. And of course, if you're a power user, go to the Yammer destination or go to SharePoint. We want to bring some of these question and answers to Cortex and all of the other surfaces. So it's not a question of one or the other. It's a question of how do we combine these in a amazing cocktail that satisfies and delights our users and adds business value. I'll tell you, though, a little more granularly, there's a fundamental difference between these types of conversations. So Yammer has a conversation style that has a long half-life. These conversations may last months. they may never actually expire. It's like knowledge. I'm sure building Cortex. Knowledge sort of builds over time, and it's not as if it has an expiry date. Maybe some of the methods change. So in the same way, Yammer has that very long-term conversational effect. Teams conversations are by nature meant to be quick so that you can get work done. And it's meant for a narrow view for a certain set of people. But because of the intense need to get productivity achieved, email is somewhere in between. And so I think the use cases sort of differ, and it's these, even though they're all conversations, an email thread is a conversation. Some of them are more real time. Some of them are more sort of off kilter. They can be asynchronous and can take time. Some of them last a long time. So that's how I view the world particularly. So it's not one versus the other, but how they blend seamlessly. And you'll see Microsoft continuing to push the angle around this, even though they may appear as if they're different sort of conversation modalities today.
Terrific. Thanks. Luke, what's a question that you've been hearing?
So I work on kind of a lot of the intelligence, specifically around that home feed that we have, seamlessly kind of blending together all of the content out there to show people the most relevant. And one of the questions that comes up again and again is why is this specific thing actually showing up in my feed? And the great answer is we're currently working on the ability to explain why something is showing up in your feed, so that every user will have the context of why that was relevant to them and can choose to kind of dive in deeper or not.
I think if you could describe why am I seeing rain more than sun, I would love to see that in my feed. More sun in my feed, please. Yeah, Murali and Luke, I think those are great questions. Chris, what is your most frequently asked question these days?
One question that's come up a lot in the last 2 weeks is about the integration of Yammer with Project Cortex. And that's something that is very much on the roadmap, being able to mine Yammer for its conversations, to look for topics, to look for highlights, and everything that Cortex does. One of the things that we have found is that Yammer can be an incredibly fruitful place to look for knowledge, because most of the dialogue that you see in Yammer by its character tends to be people communicating in full sentences and in paragraphs. Teams as a chat interface is wonderful, and some people use a similar approach to how they formulate things in Teams, but there's an awful lot of things that are just like YT ? Or emojis. And since it's chatty, it's a little bit hard to get that full textual context around the communications. It's an interesting problem space I know that we're looking at. Mark, what's a question you've been hearing lately?
Well, specific to Yammer, one of the big things that we've shifted to from a files experience is now when you have a file that you share through a Yammer community chat, that file will actually be stored in the associated file storage, which is SharePoint. For a while, we have been talking about this, but it really has now come to fruition that files in Yammer are now stored in SharePoint, the same as you would expect with the Files tab in Teams, of course, SharePoint team sites. It's the same common backend of SharePoint, as you would say, as a content service to multiple entry points. And we're now really happy to be more at scale with that entry point being Yammer. Yammer files are now stored in SharePoint.
So if you submitted a question and we did not have a chance to answer it, don't worry. We hope to pick it up on another broadcast and see you out there.
So we know a lot of events have moved to being virtual, but we want to continue to push. There's a lot of great events that are coming up. We just had Build, great success, and a lot of content now online, and of course a lot of engagement for developers. But beyond Build, Chris, what's coming up next with events?
Well, later on in May, on the 27th and 28th, Microsoft will be speaking at the Microsoft 365 Virtual Marathon. This is brought to you by many of the same people who would have been bringing you SharePoint conference this month.
Yeah, and then shortly after that, there is the Galactic Collaboration Summit. This one is definitely worth going into space for, but very grounded in a lot of great training and content. This will be on 2 days, both June 2nd and June 9th. And I will just tell you, check out their site. They've got a really cool logo, and you really will feel like you're in outer space learning about Microsoft 365.
Yeah, and I'll just note, if you had hoped to be the first person in the world to launch a website featuring SharePoint community speakers as characters dressed in space costumes from one of the Star Trek shows, you can't do it because GCS is beating you there.
That is very true. I've still been trying to get them to beam me up, but I think they just keep beaming Jeff up, Jeff Teeper. The last one on our catalog of events coming up is GlobalCon 2. That's right. There was GlobalCon 1. This one's even bigger. On June 15th to June 19th, GlobalCon 2 will cover a lot of Microsoft 365, but they'll also cover things in the Azure space, things with Dynamics, and of course across Windows and everything that's going on, pretty much everything that's going on at Microsoft. There's a lot of great MVP speakers. Jeff Teeper will have a session there as well from a keynote perspective. And some of us are participating in with sessions to keep you up to speed and, of course, address and answer a lot of questions.
Well, Mark, it's been another fun hour here on the IntraZone. I loved taking our audience through the journey with Yammer and things to come. But there's one thing I wanted to share with you, and it just occurred to me. It's a story that involves our very own CVP, Jared Spataro. 8 years ago, I was in Boston. This is before I joined Microsoft. I was general manager of the business at Dell Software. Ran into Jared at a conference in Boston. This was shortly after Microsoft had announced the Yammer acquisition. I was chatting with him about it, and he mentioned a couple of goals that Microsoft had in the acquisition. One was to get better at cloud services, that since SharePoint had been predominantly an on-premises product up through that time, he really thought it was important to bring those capabilities into Microsoft, and also recognizing that being able to extend content into communities was a direction that he really thought Microsoft needed to move in. And it is great to see us continuing to make those strides.
I would say, just to add just a little, I was at Microsoft that time, and in fact was reporting under Jared as well. And the view, not only by acquiring the product, but a lot of the changes that we saw going from building products that ship every 3 years to shifting to this service-oriented architecture and how people build out features and release them much more quickly. There's a lot of cohesiveness that came from the Yammer team because that is how they were already building their service. And there was a lot of knowledge sharing that immediately went to the teams to adjust to a cadence that was a little bit more real for how do you support a service versus how you build a product. It certainly is a lot of history to Yammer, but I think it is time for us to close out this episode. We want to thank our guests, Murali, Luke, Michael, and Angus. You can check out our show page for links to everything that we discussed today and more. Go to https://aka.ms/theinterzone. And if you're curious about other Microsoft shows, check out aka.ms/Microsoft/podcasts and listen to a new show today.
We'd love it if you could reach out questions or feedback for the SharePoint, Yammer, and M365 engineering or product teams. You can email us at theintrazone@microsoft.com or on Twitter @CMcNulty2000, @MCashman, and @SharePoint. Tell all your friends and colleagues about how much fun you have listening to the IntraZone. Please share that SharePoint love. Subscribe on the bridge of your local Star Destroyer or wherever you get your podcast.
I'm giving her all I got, Chris. We are your hosts, Mark Cashman and Chris McNulty. You've been listening to the IntraZone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Yammerized intelligent intranet.